Right. How's everybody doing today? I'm Choya Wise. With this week in supervision, we're going to try it again. Trying to get some things live, but we've been having some trouble. But we're going to get right on to what we have today. We have some interesting things to talk about. And today, in this week in supervision, normally I'm talking about different situations that we have experienced or that we may potentially experience in uh, while working with clients. And we talk about what we have discussed throughout the week in supervision with my supervisees, and hoping that some of these things might be helpful for what you may be working with. We have an interesting topic that I want to dive into really quickly, and the title is Emotional Incest and How to Identify It and What to Ask. Emotional incest, how to identify it and what to ask. Um, I don't know how many of you all have been in a situation where you have supported someone who is experiencing emotional incest. For those of you all who are not familiar with emotional incest or that term, it's nothing sexual. It just describes an inappropriate relationship that a parent generally might have. May not always be a parent, but a parent that a parent might have with a child is one of the more common scenarios that we often see. And what is happening here is that you are having what is called a role reversal. In other words, that parent who has been set there to parent and to teach their child and to allow for their child to be able to depend on them when they need them for different circumstances and challenges of life. Because of the experience of that parent, what do? They switch into a role much like a confidant or even sometimes a child, and strips that child of the much needed support that they would naturally yearn for, and it becomes destructive in relationships. Other terms for many times used for emotional enmeshment might be, emotional incest might be enmeshment, parentification. What's happening again is somewhat of like a symbiotic relationship. They can't be separated, but the cord needs to be cut, and it causes a bunch of conflict in relationships. Something that you might not know, that you might want to check out, is that often when this has happened, often when this occurs from a parent and they are emotionally enmeshed with their child, or they're in a situation where there's some emotional incest going on, it is often common. And at least what we may end up, well, I won't be able to show the video. And this is something that you need to research and evaluate. It's a really important point that I really never thought of. But many times, it's being said that many times when emotional enmeshment or emotional incest occurs, that it is resulting because the parent often has experienced trauma. Okay? The parent has experienced trauma. And many times, because of the trauma that the parent has experienced, they don't adapt very well to normalized relationships. Because of their own trauma, they could have had some type of abuse that caused them not to get along well with adults. Okay. And so then they may cling to that child, or they may just have a lot of drama. And many times when we have a lot of drama, um, it's a sign of a lot of trauma. So it still interconnects. But I hadn't until just recently, kind of going through this, thought about the possibilities of the parent who is involved with parentification, or has allowed for that to happen, where the child has switched roles with them or become like an equal role. That parent, we know they're very disturbed, but many times disturbed because they themselves have been exposed to trauma. Okay, so that's something to look into. Well, we went through a bunch of this in different scenarios, and what I like to do is bring up scenarios, and I want to bring up this quick scenario to see if you can identify some of the problems that are being that we can see demonstrated in this scenario. Okay, and then I'm going to give you some tools that you can use, and a lot of the supervisees, they were like, hey, send me a link or send me that information so that I can use that in their own psychotherapy session. So I'm going to give you a little something where if you need help with being able to identify how to assess this yourself, what type of questions do I need to ask if I suspect that there may be emotional incest, parentification, an enmeshed situation between family members. We're going to give you a little bit of tools to look into. But let's go on and jump into it. Here's the scenario that we use. So in this scenario, we have a gentleman. He's 28 years old. His name is Evan, and he reported having chronic relationship problems. Okay, chronic relationship problems. Now, this is something that is often seen when we have this dynamic going on, and we're going to talk about it. Let me just stick with it because yeah, let me stick with it. Let's get back into it. So chronic relationship problems, particularly with women. Okay, he recently ended a 2-year relationship with his girlfriend after his mother expressed strong disapproval. She's having opinions, right, as most parents should, often criticizing the girlfriend and making Evan feel guilty for choosing someone over her. Oh, now that's when we're stepping into something different. Okay, she's making him feel guilty, criticizing the girlfriend. And another thing is, a therapist, you want to trend. Is this a first time situation? Is this a second time? Is this something that trends, or is it a one time, a thing that's going on? But is it often that the mother will express disapproval, not just in the romantic relationships of the child, but often even in relationships with peers if they get too close? Because guess who's getting left out? Okay? Often criticizing the girlfriend and making Evan feel guilty for choosing. That makes you have guilt. That right, and what I find with a lot of clients I've worked with that have experienced emotional incest is that they carry a great deal of guilt and shame because it's a burden when you have been made to feel like it's your responsibility to take care of your parent. And many times this has been established early on in the early years of development. They have been given this role, and many will describe that they never really felt like they had a parent, okay, because their parent was somewhat of a friend, okay, or they felt like they were the parent. So throughout therapy, Evan reveals that growing up, his mother treated him as an emotional confidant after her divorce. She often said things like, oh boy, listen to this, you're the only man I can count on, you're the only one who understands me. That sounds like incest, doesn't it? Emotional incest, that is. And frequently made Evan responsible to her emotional well being. And Evan described feeling paralyzed between wanting to commit to a romantic relationship partner and being overwhelmed with making sure that he had loyalty for his mother. This should never, ever be a source of conflict with a child and their parent. It should never appear in a relationship. And so he was having this conflict. He experienced a great deal of, she Evan described feeling paralyzed between wanting to commit in a relationship. He experienced guilt, anxiety, and emotional numbness when trying to establish intimacy. He fears hurting or betraying his mother whenever he prioritizes his own needs or attachments. Okay, the actual scenario that I used was very similar to this, but what I did was got the supervisees to engage in identifying what the problem here the problem is here on the table. What do you identify as being an issue? And I did qualify that many times even us as therapists, because of our own trauma, certain things we may not even identify. That's why it's important to have supervision, things like that, because a lot of therapists are wounded and they don't understand the separation, the dichotomy that, yeah, this truly is a problem. This is a problem. And so we looked into it. I'm not able to show you the multiple choice question, but we did a multiple choice question, something like this. From a Freudian perspective, which concept most closely explains Evan's loyalty conflict? A. Reaction formation. B. Repetition compulsion. C. Oedipal complex. Or D. Projection. Okay, and so the answer to this would be C. Oedipal complex. Okay, and so we know what the Oedipal complex is, and it looks like that would be the best answer for this, a demonstration of that. And we have to cut that cord. We have to cut the symbiosis. In order for Evan to be able to prosper, he's got to be able to feel confident in establishing boundaries. And so we're going to get into, so what, how do you as a therapist identify the difference between a client who has a very close relationship with their parent versus something that would look like and sound like or actually is emotional incest? And that's what we're going to get into really quickly, because we want to know the difference, because often it may look like a really great relationship. The technology has failed me, but I'm going to try to leave some links and things to that would help you if you want to learn more about this, or if you want to you know well, if you want to learn more about this and if you want to include it in your therapy and things like that. I'm going to try to include the information, but there was a video where it was profoundly broken down what emotional incest is, and in the words and the description that was used was just amazing. And so I'm going to try to leave that here for you, but let's go on and get into the differences. Let's get into the differences between a close parental relationship versus emotional incest. And number one, if we look, and I'm going to try to include this chart here so you can have that as well if you want to look into it. Emotional incest or emotional support. In a close relationship, the parent provides emotional support to the child. With emotional incest, guess what happens? The child provides emotional support to the parent. And so there's a role reversal, as I've already expressed. It's not that there can't ever be an exchange between the two, where the child also offers support. It's just what we're talking about is a role reversal. And so no longer is the parent functioning in a parental role. They are functioning in a role that is equal to that of the child, okay? Or they are functioning as the one who is the child. Boundaries. This is a big one, and we're just going to touch on it. In a healthy relation, a close relationship, healthy age appropriate boundaries are maintained, right? So we establish boundaries. There's no guilt with it. Okay, we just say, hey mom, hey dad, I'm not really feeling like this is the best situation for me right now, or hey, I kind of am in love with Michelle. Okay, and I think that this is someone I want to be in my life. And so you express that without a significant level of fear. But when boundaries are blurred, the child becomes the confidant or surrogate partner. Okay, that is another sign. Autonomy is encouraged. That is huge. And this lets you know, if autonomy is not encouraged in this relationship, it's because and this is what I wanted to speak on. Okay, when autonomy many times is not going to be encouraged in a situation who with a parent who establishes establishes emotional intimacy with their child, or emotional incest, I'm sorry, with their child. I just can't get that today for some reason. That's when it's not going to be there. They're not going to do that. Why? Because there's a deficit. that that parent is having. It's a deficit that they are experiencing. And so anyone who is a third party is considered or deemed to be a threat. And so then we see that being enacted. And so a lot of times what ends up happening in the long term is that you have this emotionally attached child and this emotionally attached parent. They're enmeshed in an inappropriate way. And so it is very destructive for them to establish healthy relationships moving forward. Another thing that I have seen, I know I need to move forward. Another thing that I have seen is that really in a lot of these situations, the parent really doesn't have that much of a life per se. Okay, outside of that child. That child is their world. Okay, and so that's why it makes it difficult for them to develop milestones and experience breakthroughs and things in their lives unless that parent is there supporting them. Okay, they don't know how to function and breathe without the parent being right there in their on their shoulder in their ear. Okay, so they're not encouraging them to be autonomous because they want to save that place for themselves, and they don't want to be intimidated or threatened by a third party. So they'll essentially find problems with the relationship. The parent might feel guilt that the parent may guilt the child for being independent. Again, the roles are not clear. The parents' needs. Guilt is a big part in a healthy relationship. Relationship is loving and secure. In emotional incest, and I'm skipping around, the child feels guilt, burden, or obligation to manage the parent's emotions. Okay, so what are some questions that you might ask? And I got a bunch of them, and we'll just go through a couple. Okay, so there's a few things when you are, assessing if this is occurring in the situation that you're working with. How to assess this in therapy. You want to ask a lot of questions. You want to, number one, listen for role reversal in childhood narratives. You want to ask about boundaries in the parental or the parent child relationship. You want to note guilt and loyalty conflicts, explore relationship patterns, and want to identify therapeutic clues and transference. Now, here's an example of a question that you might ask. Who did, and you want to, in a sense, be inconspicuous because you don't want to be leading. And so you might ask, who did your parent turn to when they were upset? Or did you ever feel like you had to take care of your parent emotionally? Were you ever told things like, you're the only one who understands me, or something like what I reported earlier? Um, did you feel responsible for your parents' happiness? So when we see that there's been a role reversal, you may see something like, you might hear something like, well, I was the one who comforted mom or dad, or they told me everything about their relationship problems. Now, that right there is telling us there's some incest going on there because there is a spouse that I'm supposed to be talking to, not a parent about the relationship problem. So that's when we start crossing the line. I felt like the only one they could trust. I would, and again, we're talking about the role reversal. I was always the mature one in the family. How about boundaries? Who did your parent turn to when they were upset? Let's kind of repeat. Did you ever feel more like an adult in the relationship? And then we've talked about the guilt. I really would like for you all to take a look at this video, and I'm going to leave a link to these notes and the video, and this will help you to be able to establish and determine if this is something that's being experienced, because when it's being experienced, a child is experiencing that, the child that is now an adult, it is very difficult for them to navigate in a healthy way through life because they don't have their own identity. Okay, because the identity has been established by that parent who many times, as I stated earlier, may have experienced their own set of abuse that has not been worked out, has not been repaired. And so as a compensation, that child is placed in a position that they shouldn't be in. And so this is what we treat. This is how we identify it. This is how we get to the bottom of it. I'm going to stop here. I hope that this is helpful. And again, I'm going to list some of these tools. I'm going to try to do my best. And hopefully this will help you out. Now remember, we do have a training coming up. I can't show it. If you're a part of Social Workers of Alabama, that is free, and it's called Preventing the Crispy Effect: Ethical Strategies to Combat Burnout. And we have none other than Lalani Mason, and she is an awesome speaker. She always comes through, when she's come through for us. It's just been awesome. All right, and then we have, for those of us who are looking to be a supervisor, we already have people, booking this training. If you want that independence and you're ready to make, and this is an important thing, if you are a clinical owner, if you're an owner of a practice, now Blue Cross is allowing, they have opened up the opportunity for you to bill for interns and supervisees. So as a method to support that LMSW that can't get those hours somewhere else and is struggling because they don't have somebody, they're saying, oh, we don't have a way to book you. Blue Cross Lucid in Alabama is now allowing for supervisory billing. You may want to check to make sure it's fully in place because this is brand new. Okay, but but you guess what, you need to be a supervisor in order to be able to do that, because this is supervisory billing. If you come to this training, you can get those credentials that you need. And also we have on online and on demand the DSM-5 TR training that is for LICSWs. All LICSWs will be required to take a DSM-5 training. We have a great one for you. Hope you check it out. Y'all take care now. Bye bye.